Hi, my name is Suzanne Engel and I am the owner and president of Flat Wearable Artisan Jewelry. In this video tutorial, I will be demonstrating the soldering only method of hinged silverware bracelet construction. We have done a couple of videos in the past whereby we used rivets to apply the hinges to the silverware bracelet, then solder to hold everything in place. We've eliminated the need for drilling holes and for rivets, and are using now a soldering only method. And what that allows is for a very clean installation on your silverware bracelets with no rivets poking out on either side in order to detract from the look of the bracelet. This is also allowed for there to be better snap return for the hinges. It gives a much more solid installation of the hinge and allows for a better snap. You can see these have a really beautiful snap. Really nice, clean installation. We're going to show you how to do this. This is an advanced learning technique. Therefore, some of you are going to struggle with the application of the soldering only hinges. It is something that can be learned, but it does take patience and it does take practice. You need to practice over and over again. You're going to ruin hinges. I've ruined multiple hinges during the time I've tried to learn the best method for this application. So we've taken all of our knowledge over the past 4 years with input from some of our customers who have shared some of their knowledge on how they apply their hinges to silverware bracelets. We've combined all of this information together and developed a system whereby you can do this in the easiest way that we know how to explain possible. Just because we are showing you one method doesn't mean that it's the answer for everyone. You may develop methods of your own that are easier and more efficient for you. We're showing you what works for us. And we're just going to go ahead and get started. One thing that I want to be able to do is to share with you some of the pitfalls and some of the things that I've learned that work well and some things that do not work well for this application. One thing that I have found that seems to be pretty essential is to choose silverware pieces that are wide enough in the handle so that they are going to cover more than half of the width of the hinge. So by placing the hinge across the silverware, you can see that this silverware is going to cover more than half of the width of the hinge. If you use a real skinny piece of silverware, you're not going to be able to cover the little prongs of the spring that stick out into the hinge itself. I'm finding this to be very important for the amount of spring back that you will achieve when the silverware bracelet is completed. If you're not covering this little prong, what happens over time is as the bracelet is opened and closed, that little spring in the back will start to poke out and away from the hinge itself. And that weakens the spring. So choose silverware that's wide enough that it's going to cover more than half of the width of the hinge. Alright, today I am using the bender press. If you are using one of our G series benders, you're going to bend in the method that you're most accustomed to. I am using the number 6 roller, which is the largest of the rollers, either for the bender press or the G series benders. It is the 1 3/4 inch roller. And I'm going to go ahead and bend the silverware for my first bracelet. you want to have what I always call the candy cane shape when it comes to making rings. You're going to do the same thing here. I'm using a couple of large serving pieces. I like the serving pieces. They really make nice substantial bracelets. Okay, so now we've cut that, excuse me, we've bent that. I'm going to measure out for this. It's really super easy to determine how big you want your bracelet. If you want a 6-inch bracelet, you're going to cut each piece at 3 inches. Do keep in mind that you're going to have between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch for the hinge. So the determination for the length that you cut these pieces is really super simple. You take the length of the bracelet that you want, you divide that in half, then you know how long to cut your bracelet section. I am going to make a bracelet that is for a 7-inch bracelet, which would fit approximately a 6.5, 6 3/4 inch wrist. So I'm going to grab my tape measure and my Sharpie marker. If you know how to bend and do this process, you might want to skip over this section of the video. So I'm going to measure around. You can do this before you bend, after you bend. It really doesn't matter. I would suggest that you should pre-polish your pieces, at least somewhat, just to get the tarnish off. Be a lot easier for you to clean afterwards. So I am going to, like I said, make a 7-inch bracelet. I am going to mark this at 3.5 inches. It's going to be slightly bigger than 7 because, like I said, you're going to have 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch with the hinge. And mark. And we're going to use our bolt cutters to cut. We find the bolt cutter is the easiest way to do this. Let me just bring this camera out a little bit. You can see this a little better. Just move some of my things out of the way here. So we're just going to snap off the top portion. We have our 2 bracelet sections. What you want to do is you want to put them together. If you like the shape, you're good to go. If you want to vary that shape a little bit, now is the time to do that. So we're just going to clean off the sharp edge on here real quick, just to clean off the sharp edge using the mini grinder. Now I know that there are some people that don't smooth off that cut edge. I believe you should take just that extra minute to do that. It makes for a nicer looking bracelet and no chance of anything clothing snagging on that sharp edge. I do realize that it is up against a hinge, but it still looks a lot nicer if you smooth off that edge. Alright, we're going to go over to the soldering station from here. Okay, we're here at the soldering station now, and we're going to go ahead and apply the hinge. Now when I cut this piece, I found that it's really nice and wide, and so it covers really a very large portion of the hinge. So this really is an excellent choice. So what you're going to need is take one of your hemostats, which is a scissor looking clamp, and you're going to clamp it on and hold the silverware piece onto the hinge. I'll give you a close-up here in a moment when I get it on. This, I would say, is probably one of the trickiest parts of doing this. Is holding everything in place, getting the hemostat on, and making sure it's all straight. You also want to get the piece of silverware as close as you can. Hold it up against me. I find it may be a little easier to do that. You want to get it as close as you can to the spring without touching the spring. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is the heat transfer. Heat is the enemy of the spring hinge. It will lose its temper and the spring will no longer be effective if it achieves too much heat. So you can see I've got that very close to the spring, that little coil, without touching it. Okay? Now, the next part is to put the other side on. You are not interested in lining it up at this point. You are just interested in getting it put together. So you can see it's a little overlapped here. Perfectly fine. It does not matter. It's actually better if you don't try to line it up at this point. Again, this is going to be probably the trickiest part. Getting everything lined up and clamped and straight. Again, I find it easier just maybe to kind of hold it up against me. And you're actually going to spring that hinge a little bit backwards, and that's fine. I like to get it really nice and lined up as even as I can. You know, it's not always going to be perfect. Once you've got that straight, I'll see it even moved a little bit on me. You are probably going to find this to be the most difficult part. I believe it is for me. Line it up. If you develop a method by which of doing this better, I'd love it if you'd share it with us. Okay, so I have both pieces there, not touching the coil part of the spring. You also want to make sure on the inside that you leave the edge of the hinge exposed, because that is where your solder is going to go. So if your clamp is covering the edge of the hinge, you have to move it over. Alright? This definitely takes some practice. One thing I like to do is I like to use some heat protectant gel over that spring area. I'm using this Cool Gel. It's from LACO, and it's a heat barrier spray. It's kind of like a gel. I just use a small artist's brush and dab it on just the spring area only. The spring area only. Because if you get it on the other areas, those areas won't heat sufficiently and the solder will not flow properly. Okay? The second thing that I like to do to protect that spring from the heat is to use an alligator clip. And I'm placing the alligator clip directly over the spring on the hinge. And what that does is it creates what's called a heat sink. And when you heat this to do your soldering, the heat is actually drawn into the clip and away from the spring. So it definitely protects the spring from excessive heat. The next thing to keep in mind is the solder that you're using. The solder that we find that's working the best for us is a rosin core lead-free solder. Lead-free, obviously, for the reasons of safety. This is a bracelet that's going to be going up against the skin. You do not want to use a leaded solder and have it touch the skin. As we know, lead is not safe for humans to either consume or to wear next to them. The second thing is its rosin core. The core of the solder contains rosin, which is a flux. Therefore, you do not need to apply any additional flux, again saving you a step. So what we're going to do now, and I'm going to rotate the camera, and we're going to go over to the soldering station, and I'm going to explain to you the soldering station. The soldering area, I find, is almost as essential as all the other aspects of doing this. You need something where you can get your work up high, where you can see it clearly, and you can direct your heat underneath. If you only have this much area between your work and your work surface, it's very difficult to get the flame up under there and direct the heat properly. So we made this soldering station here. You can use a third hand, definitely. This is a third hand that we've made. We are actually in the process of producing these for you guys. This one was just put on a piece of wood. We're actually making them out of aluminum, and we will have these available on our website coming up very soon if you would choose to purchase one. You can use the third hand as well. I like this better because I can adjust these any way that I want to adjust them to make it most comfortable for me to do my soldering. Okay, so you've got this all put together now. You've got this all straightened out. Again, don't need to line it up at this point. That's not important. So I'm going to clip this all on to the third hand soldering station. I'm going to line everything up nice and level, everything even. If you find that your hemostats are heavy and they're falling down, all you got to do is just do a little bit of adjustment to get that held right into place. What you need to do now is grab your solder wire, and you're going to cut pieces, small pieces, that are about the width of the piece of silverware that you're working on. And you're going to place these pieces of solder in on top of the silverware, right where the hinge joins the silverware. Now I'm going to get this close for you guys so you can see this real clearly. Okay, we've got everything in place now. We're going to take these little solder chips, little pieces that we've cut, and we're going to put them right alongside where the hinge joins the bracelet. All right. I'm going to use a butane torch. Solder flows in the direction of heat. You want the solder to flow between the hinge and the silverware bracelet. So it would make sense to put your heat underneath this area, but not over the spring area. So you need a torch that has a pretty fine point and direct your heat right in this area here to the left side of the hemostat here to the right side of the hemostat here. The solder flows relatively quickly. What also you're going to want to keep in mind is when you have a piece of silverware like this, where there's almost like a channel in here, there's like a high edge and a high edge, and then it dips down low. You need to keep in mind that you may need to feed a little more solder in there to fill in that gap. You'll see that the hinge touches this side and touches the far side, but it doesn't touch in between the hinge and the silverware piece. So once the solder flows down in there, you may need to feed a little more solder in there to fill in that gap. You keep in mind You do not want to add too much solder because as the solder flows, if you have too much, it's going to seep between the hinge and the silverware bracelet right directly into the spring. And then you're going to solder the spring solid. And it's not what you want to do. So this is something that takes practice about how much solder to do without doing too much. So it's a little awkward position for me. I'm going to do the best I can. I'm directing my heat just to the right of the hemostat, keeping it moving. Once that solder flows, and it flows right there, I'm going to feed just a little bit more in, okay? Make sure it's spread out. You'll see if you're using our solder, it melts at approximately 450 degrees. It's pretty quick. It did it. I'm going to feed a little more in there. I actually got a little on the hinge, on the top of the hinge, which I don't want to do. It's a little awkward position for me here, so I got a little bit on top of the hinge. Not a problem. So remember, everything is hot. You're going to want to take all this off now. Let me back the camera up. Take everything off. Pinch it to remove it. Pinch it to remove it. I keep a little jar of water right next to me to quench it. It's very hot. Alright, remove the hemostat. Remove the alligator clip. Remove the hemostat. Okay, now you can adjust. You just pull it out. Sometimes you need to open it up a little bit on one side so it becomes even. A little bit of adjustment, just a tiny bit of adjustment. I'm going to pull that out just a bit so the tips line up. You get a nice snap. You've got a great installation there. So, let me let you see how this looks. You can see where the solder has flowed between the hinge and the silverware bracelet. You've got a little bit of fire scale there. Just a tiny bit, very easy to clean off on your buffer. Alright, I am going to show you the next step. Sometimes you're going to see that you're going to get a little bit of discoloration on the hinge, and I'm going to show you how to clean that discoloration off. If you find that you're not cleaning the discoloration off well, you may have burnt off the plating on the hinge itself, and that just lets you know that you've applied too much heat. Your heat was too concentrated, and you damaged the silver plating. What you can do is really just buff off the silver plating entirely. It's going to leave this brass look, but really it's on the inside and it's something that won't be seen. So if you do it, you know, it's not all a lost cause. Okay, this gives a really nice snap here. Don't by any means pull this all the way open and stretch it all the way back. You're going to ruin the hinge. You need to teach your customers how to open it slightly. Put it on the side of the wrist and allow it to close. Same thing coming off. Slightly and pull it off. Never allow your customers to put their hand through it. It bends the spring back much too far and does permanent damage, and it is useless. Therefore, you're going to have to remove it and start all over again. So let's go over to the Dremel station. Okay, I'm here at my Dremel station. There's a couple of ways you can clean off a little bit of that discoloration. One is just by using a little piece of steel wool. Just remember, if you apply the steel wool too heavy, you'll remove the silver plating entirely. I find that method just a little too slow for my likes, so I'm going to use an abrasive buff on my Dremel, and I'm going to lightly clean off that discoloration. Okay, you can see that the discoloration has been removed. I did, like I said, got some solder right on the edge of the hinge there. You want to try to avoid any sloppy soldering. It just looks so much nicer if you get that nice clean soldering and the solder flows underneath instead of on top. But the position I was in made it a little bit awkward for me to get the solder right there. So I did have a little blob there. And actually I like to take my abrasive buff and just clean up the inside just lightly. What it does is it puts a brushed finish on the inside. I don't know, I just like it. I think it makes a nice comparison to the outside, which is going to be shiny. I'm going to take this over and buff this up real quick and it will be finished. Okay, I've taken the bracelet over to my bench buffer, my 6-inch bench buffer, and cleaned off that little bit of fire scale. Very, very minor amount. Cleans right off immediately using the white compound. So just clean up any mess that's left, and you have a beautiful installation of the hinge on your silverware bracelet. Okay? I hope you enjoyed this video and you've learned a lot from it. Please don't give up. When you get frustrated, put it away for a little while, take it back out again, watch the video over and over again. Feel free to ask questions. We're available. The easiest way to really talk to us is Facebook us a message, send us an email. If your questions are kind of short, call us on the phone. We are busy during the day with our store, so we don't really have a lot of time for extended conversation. But hopefully this video has been very helpful and that you will learn this method with the least amount of difficulty. It has been a very frustrating experience for me personally. I had nobody to teach it to me, so I am taking what I have learned and sharing it with you guys to help you alleviate some of the frustration that you may feel. So we'll be talking to you guys again real soon with our next latest greatest thing. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.